Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our politics panel on the path to a pipeline following the latest Alberta-Ottawa agreement. But first, 50 years and counting. It was on May 19th, 1976. The Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund Act was given royal assent. The objectives of the Peter Lougheed government of the day: save for the future, strengthen or diversify the economy, and improve the quality of life of Albertans. In 2025, the Smith government introduced an independent Crown corporation tasked with oversight of all fund assets and managing a portion of assets directly. Joining us now, Moshe Lander, an Alberta-based economics professor with Concordia University and a former senior economist for the government of Alberta. Moshe, good to see you, sir. Welcome back.
Hello.
All right, so to what degree has the Heritage Fund stayed true to those initial goals set out by the Lougheed government 50 years ago? Does it still serve the same purpose?
It still does in theory. I don't know that it does in practice. The amount of money that's in that fund is a fraction of what it could be, should be, would be, because over the last 20 years in particular, governments have used it as a rainy day fund for whatever immediate crisis is in front of them. If you look at, say, Norway, which is a oil-rich country that has its own sovereign wealth fund, that is multiple times bigger than what Alberta has, even after accounting for differences in political structure and differences at a national level as opposed to a provincial level. And so while the commitment to the fund is still there, I don't think that it really achieved what Premier Lougheed wanted 50 years ago.
So how does the Heritage Fund then play into the political dynamics?
Well, again, everybody talks about it. Everybody wants to see it grow. Everybody makes maybe some heroic assumptions as to what you can do with that money at some point. But I think that there's this competing problem within conservative politics. That on the one hand, we want the oil and gas to flow forever. Yet at the same time, we're saying that the Heritage Fund is there for when the oil and gas stops. So, you know, if you're committed to making sure that the oil and gas is going to flow forever, and that's perfectly fine, then you tend to see the Heritage Fund as a little less than something to have for the future and something that can be raided periodically and used to try and get out of difficult situations or predicaments maybe of the government's own making. And we have seen time and again that when these budget deficits come in pretty substantially large, you know, the way they cover for it is they say, well, we're just going to dip in this one time. But every government has that one time that they're going to dip into it, and that holds it back from being what it could be.
Let me throw you a quick hypothetical. What would come of the Heritage Fund were Alberta ever to separate? Would all those dollars then become available to whatever government or group emerges in control?
Well, they technically are now. And by they, I mean the dollars, not the separatists. You know, look, there's probably separatists within our government right now. And there's been those accusations that have been made that how many of them have been at these meetings or how many of them signed those petitions. And so, you know, in theory, any government can go dip into that Heritage Fund. And because in Alberta politics, whoever the government of the day is, because it's essentially a two-party state in which we live, it's one party that tends to have a pretty overwhelming majority. And so it doesn't require a lot to be able to access those funds. So if we have a separate Alberta going forward, then that's going to be just as accessible. It's not like the federal government is going to try and make a pitch for it. So, hey, whether we're inside Canada or outside, I don't think that changes things. What I do think changes is that I've said before that the cost of a separate Alberta are much more substantial than people are letting on, which is why we haven't seen any estimates from the separatist group as to how positive it's going to be. I think they're going to need to rate it all the more to try and make ends meet with a separate Alberta. And that means then that the long-term benefits, which are already questionable, are going to be even less apparent going forward.
In late 2024, the Alberta government fired the entire board of AIMCO, the Crown corporation that manages the Heritage Fund. Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper shortly thereafter appointed to oversee it. How is the Heritage Fund faring under new management?
I don't see a substantial difference, unfortunately. The returns that you would need at this point to put it on more solid footing are pretty substantial. The Premier has said that she wants to reach a goal of, I can't remember how many hundreds of billions of dollars within the next decade or so. What would be needed would be outperforming, say, most stock markets around the world. And so you'd have to be investing into some pretty high leverage or high risk situations, which I don't think governments in general want to use with taxpayer dollars. Beyond that, the only other way that you're going to be able to meet your target is that you're going to have to set aside large amounts of current tax dollars to be able to fund that. But when the government comes in with deficits that run into the 8 figures, I don't see that there's money there to be able to put into it, especially when Albertans are clamoring for more healthcare, better roads, better schools, and all of the basic needs to help with cost of living and affordability issues. So I don't think it really matters who's managing it. But let's also remember, at the end of the day, Stephen Harper's a politician. He's not a fund manager. And so if you really are committed to try and build that fund, what you need then is somebody with fund management experience, not somebody who once ran Canada's government fiscal policy. Those are two totally different things.
I believe the pitch was $250 billion by 2050 is what the Premier was targeting. But what do you see the future then holding for Alberta's Heritage Savings Trust Fund if it is that the Smith government's goal of a pipeline to the West Coast is realized?
Well, again, that's where we question what is going on then with the fund. Is this going to be one of those things that in 3 years, 5 years' time, when there's not a business case to be made for that pipeline, that the Premier jumps in and says, well, we're going to use the Heritage Fund then, and we're going to take ownership of one of those pipelines, or we're going to be a co-investor, or to try and make the math, we're going to try and use some of this money and deliver benefits to Albertans. I mean, I could easily write a speech as to how this would benefit Albertans. Unfortunately, the economics would say something totally different, but you can make it sound pretty impressive that, hey, owning a pipeline would be a way to build Alberta's prosperity as well. I hope that they will continue to use this as a rainy day fund. No matter how much the oil and gas flows or we want it to flow, there is a day where it will not be flowing. And so it would be nice to think that 50, 100 years down the line, whenever that money is needed, that it's going to be there to be able to take care of an Alberta that's at 5 million and growing.
All right, we'll have to leave it there for time. As always, appreciate your time, Moshe. Thank you.
Anytime.
Moshe Lander is an Alberta-based economics professor with Concordia University and a former senior economist for the government of Alberta. From the latest agreement to push a new pipeline forward to 50 years of the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, and an Edmonton City Councillor's move to rename a road by the legislature. Time now for tonight's politics panel. Joining us this evening, political analyst and commentator John Brennan, and Don Hill, co-founder of the blog Beyond Polarity and a longtime broadcast journalist in Alberta. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with the latest pipeline MOU element, signed Friday by the Premier and Prime Minister. Danielle Smith says consultation with Indigenous communities is underway and will ramp up in July after an official proposal is submitted.
We've got a really good value proposition. There's an enormous economic benefit, and we now have new tools to allow for Indigenous ownership, which will amount to substantial dollars that will go to the communities that would be willing to host this and partner with us on it.
Friday's updated signing paves the way to potential construction of a new pipeline to the West Coast in 2027 and oil flowing by 2033. The project tied to the $16.5 billion Pathways carbon capture project, as well as the industrial carbon price, which will climb to $130 a ton by 2040. John, in terms of the significance of this latest signing ceremony held Friday in Calgary, how far does it actually go to moving the needle on a new pipeline?
It's a positive development, Michael. You know, it continues to move the yardsticks down the field, and that's what we all want to see because, of course, this new pipeline from Alberta to BC would be a net benefit, not just Alberta, but all of Canada. But there's still issues that need to be resolved, Michael. Mainly, will the Pathways Alliance carbon capture, utilization, and storage project actually get built? Because it is a condition on which this pipeline deal is based. The Indigenous consultation process has to go forward over the next year or so, with all the First Nations bands between Strathcona County and wherever this pipeline is going to end up, whether it's in Kitimat, Prince Rupert, or down south. And, we still don't have a private sector proponent. Although I will say, Michael, there was good news on Friday when Enbridge stepped forward and said, if all the regulatory hurdles can be cleared, they would be interested in building this project. So it was a positive step on Friday, Michael. We've moved the yardsticks down the field a little bit closer, but there are still a lot of issues that need to be resolved.
And Don, we'll get to impact on separatist sentiments in a moment. How far, though, do you see this development going to winning over those who've questioned whether there would ever be another pipeline, those who question the buy-in of the federal government?
Well, there's a number of factors. I'm agreeing with everything that John just said, but I want to add to the discussion a bit. Now, let's not forget that the Premier of British Columbia has gone on the record that Canada, meaning the federal government, is rewarding Alberta for bad behavior. So Mr. Eby is stirring the hornet's nest, so to speak. The second, and I'll get to more about that a little later, and the second piece on this one is, what do we mean by Indigenous investment? Where is that money going to come from? Now, what's bubbling up in the background is that where that money is going to come from is from you. Yes, you, who are watching that right now, the taxpayer, which will be given money to First Nations. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that's what's bubbling there. And they will have ownership forever on the right-of-way. So these kinds of discussions will likely be popping up in the near future, maybe perhaps amongst the separatists as well. Last point, most significant, there's a lot of moving parts here. And it's okay if the government says, like Norway said, we're going to build and buy this thing and put it together because it's in the nation's interest, Canada or whatever. Maybe that's the way forward and not have to worry about private sector investment on this one, at least to get some surety and security on this project. I'll leave it at that.
Well, John, the Alberta government's pipeline plan it's due by July 1st. October 1st would then be the day to be declared to be in the national interest, fast-tracked for approval. How might that change dynamics around the October 19th referendum and all of its questions?
Well, it's certainly a positive development, Michael. And as both Premier Smith and Prime Minister Carney said on Friday, it's a demonstration that Canada works, that the government of Canada and the government of Alberta can get together and work on an agreement that puts in place the regulatory framework so a new pipeline can be built between Alberta and BC. But, with regards to hardcore separatists, the Jeffrey Raths and the Mitch Sylvesters and David Parkers of the world, this isn't going to make any difference to them because they want to separate from Canada, and it's going to make no difference to their proposal going forward. But for the vast majority of Albertans that want Alberta to remain in Canada and that want Canada to work, the announcement between Prime Minister Carney and Premier Smith on Friday was a positive development. And my view, Michael, is that the majority of Albertans welcomed the announcement on Friday.
Don, let's pick up on that. And you did touch on it briefly a moment ago, but how does any of this potentially change dynamics around support for the separatist movement?
Well, what's crazy about this, and Michael, I think you'll agree with me on this one, that this is the craziest news cycle I've seen over the length of my career in media. And it's almost impossible to predict where this is going, but that's where it's headed. But I do, and I've said this before, know that it will be emotional. Totally emotional. I think most Albertans are muting themselves. They're not actually saying what's really on their mind. But when they do get into that referendum and they're in the privacy of the ballot and check off in that, well, I don't know what's going to happen. And I'm hedging my bets here. John and I, just before we got on camera here, we're talking about a bet. And what I offered was, well, I don't know where this is going to go, but I offered exactly this, a loonie. So anything is possible in these loony times about where this is going in politics and Eby saying this and all that kind of stuff. It's all going to get down to that ballot box. And that's what scares me. It will be emotional.
All right, time for us to take a bit of a break. But when we come back, the road forward for Alberta's 50-year-old Heritage Savings Trust Fund. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. It was on this day 50 years ago, May 19th, 1976, the Heritage Savings Trust Fund was founded, and we discussed past and present dynamics with Concordia University Prof. Moshe Lander, a former senior economist with the Alberta government. That was off the top of the program this evening. Don, as a legacy of the Lougheed government, what resonates with you about the fund as an element of our province's political history?
Well, what's very intriguing about the time that we're in right now is that that particular fund, in a democracy called Canada and a province having a sovereign fund, et cetera, that was used as an example by the Norwegian government. The last time I checked, their sovereign fund is over $1 trillion. But what was interesting about that sovereign fund in Norway, that Norway was asked to join the European Union twice. And in those two votes, Norwegians said, no, we're not joining the European Union. One of the arguments was that if you do, if Norway did join the European Union, they might have to deal with the confiscatory policy of Brussels. Let me translate that, meaning a federal government or governance, like we have here in Canada, could have a confiscatory policy that could use, for example, the Alberta government's money to fund other stuff, okay? So that's why Norwegians voted twice no to the European Union, because of what happened in Alberta. Last point, and I'll try and make it quick. This has been also knowledgeable for people, and I have to bring this up. The Norwegians own both of the companies, the big companies, that manage that huge oil wealth. And that's interesting as well. So they don't actually need private partners per se. And they learned all of this, I'm told, from what happened here in Alberta 50 years ago on.
Okay. John, how do you see the Heritage Fund potentially fitting into the separatism dynamic? Could it become a focal point?
I'm not sure if it's even going to come up in the debate, Michael, because I agree with what Moshe Lander said, that if the separatists ever won and Alberta became a separate country, the Alberta Heritage Trust Fund would stay with whatever the political entity would be that would be governing Alberta. But I don't see any of those things happening, because I don't see the separatists winning the referendum this fall, and I don't see Alberta becoming a separate country, so the whole thing is moot. What I will say about the Alberta Heritage Trust Fund, Michael, is I think, when Peter Lougheed set it up in 1976, it was a positive development, because the government of Alberta at the time was just rolling in the revenue, and it needed to do something with that excess revenue. So it set up the Alberta Heritage Trust Fund. What happened in the 1980s, when the price of oil dropped, Don Getty was the premier at the time, and he stopped putting, first they were putting 30% of the natural resource royalties into the Heritage Trust Fund. It cut that down to 15%, and then eventually down to zero. And that's because the government of Alberta needed those revenues, instead of going into the Heritage Trust Fund, instead into general revenues to pay for healthcare and education and post-secondary education. So that's why the Alberta Heritage Trust Fund hasn't grown that much, since the 1980s.
Don, I'll just ask one more question on this. How do you see the fund potentially changing debate and contention around the separatism movement? Is it that Albertans sit back and think, oh, I hadn't thought about the value of the Heritage Savings Trust Fund and how that might fit into a separation element?
Now, let me just also, I don't want to say anything that's going to be offensive. I'm serious. John, everything you've said is correct. It's true. And it's very smart and wise and logical. But this is not going to be logical. This is like a bad divorce or whatever, or somebody in the family is upset with somebody. This is like a family feud that's been going on for decades. And that's what's being whipped up as we speak. Let's not forget, just on Monday, the day before this one, the United States has decided that they're going to pull out of an agreement that was put together by Mackenzie King and Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1940. We're in very, very different times now. And all this logic and inside baseball and stuff that we did over this, I think we're in completely new territory. We have no idea where this is heading. But I'll keep saying this. I'll keep banging this drum. It will be emotional. It doesn't have to make sense. So that's why I'm going to be watching for this summer. is how these arguments are going to be trotted out to get you, me, and everybody angry, this, that, or the other thing. Also, watch out for the foreign actors coming in to whip up the crowd, so to speak. There's a lot in play here, friends. We have to be careful.
All right, one more topic for us, and that's an Edmonton City Councillor attempting to rename a section of a road outside the legislature in honor of the Forever Canadian efforts.
This conversation spun into, how do we honor this campaign? How do we have a record and a memory of this? And we thought there's no greater place than right here in front of our provincial legislature, and no greater way to honor in a permanent way than doing a street renaming. Michael Jans has announced that he will be submitting an application to the Edmonton Naming Committee, which, if approved, would see 99th Ave between 107th and 109th Streets renamed Forever Canadian Avenue. Jans says he will be collecting donations and paying out of pocket for the name change. John, how do you see an initiative like this landing with the Smith government?
Well, I don't think they'll be that pleased, Michael. And I will say, I think it's a positive development, and I welcome what Michael Jans is doing, and I think it's a good idea. But let's also put this in perspective. You know, this is very performative. The fact that 99th Avenue between 109th Street and 107th Street is going to be renamed Forever Canadian Avenue is not going to make that much difference in the grand scheme of things. But it is a small little kick in the shins by Michael Jans to Danielle Smith and the UCP government. But, you know, in the grand scheme of things, and with regards to the debate which is going to unfold in Alberta over the course of the next 4 or 5 months, it's not going to make a lot of difference, Michael.
Don, is now the time to be launching such an initiative, or is now as good a time as any?
Oh, please don't hate me for saying this. Why do we have a problem with democracy? Yes, Forever Canadian. So what happens if the separatists, as you said, John, come up and says, well, let's have a Forever Albertan Avenue or whatever, this kind of thing. And I agree with Michael. It's all performative. It's showbiz. It is what it is. But at the end of the day, I'm going to keep repeating myself. Whipping up emotions doesn't help when people have to make a quick decision about left, right, straight, upside down, or forward. And that's got my attention. Everything is performative, it's emotional, but it's going to affect the future of ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren. We have to be careful with the stories that we're telling each other. Please be careful.
Now, one more quick one, John. The Committee of MLAs tasked with determining what to do with that Forever Canadian petition, now to meet suddenly tomorrow. Thomas Lukaszuk set this time to actually make a presentation. What's potentially developing on that front as far as you see it going?
I think because the separatist petition was quashed by the Court of King's Bench judge, it has put Danielle Smith in a box. She's promised to have a referendum. The separatist petition is not going to end up as a referendum. So my guess is, Michael, is that Danielle Smith decided over the weekend that we are going to allow Thomas Lukaszuk's question to be the referendum question that we're going to vote on October 19th. And that is, do you agree that Alberta should remain in Canada? So I think the Special Select Committee tomorrow is going to hear from Lukaszuk. They're going to discuss it. And I think they are going to recommend to the Legislative Assembly that Thomas Lukaszuk's Forever Canadian petition question be on the ballot on October 19th as the referendum question.
All right. Interesting week ahead. Gentlemen, we have to leave it there. Great to see you both. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, John. Good to see you again. Bye-bye.
Now, here are a few responses to a recent story posted by CTV News. It's about the pipeline details signed by the Smith and Carney governments last week. Thank you very much writes, as an Albertan, why would Canadians want their taxes to pay for a pipeline out of Alberta when Alberta separatists want out of Canada? Saucy Sandwiches is skeptical, saying, I refuse to believe it until pipe hits the ground. Bill also has some doubt. He writes, saying they're going to and getting are two different things, but Felicia is on board. She writes, "This is so amazing. I love this teamwork and understanding. But according to common sense, instead of a pipeline, why not get Canadians better gas prices? Have your say. Email us anytime at comments@albertaprimetime.com. Coming up tomorrow with the snowbirds to be grounded at the end of the current season, awaiting the arrival of new aircraft in the 2030s. We will hear from former fighter pilot and Member of Parliament Lori Hahn on Wednesday. Until then, have a great evening, everyone, from all of us at Alberta Primetime. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time.